It was Christmas Eve. A certain man had dyed his hair, shaved his beard, and inserted colored contact lenses into his eyes. Altering his appearance, he intended to leave this house where there was an eerie silence. There were many family photos on the shelves. The man packed his belongings, played a Christmas song on the radio, and had coffee with a toast, as if nothing had happened. Hardly anyone in the neighborhood suspects that all the members of the family where this man lived are no longer alive. Something terrible had happened here the day before, but the man had no intention of covering up the traces of his heinous crime. He simply walked away. The police were informed that a woman and her 3 children were found in their home with no signs of life. Initially, suspicions fell on the woman's ex-husband Dylan, but he had a solid alibi. Moreover, Dylan went into genuine hysteria during the identification process, so suspicions were quickly dismissed. Another possible suspect is Grady Edwards, the woman's new boyfriend, who was supposedly from Kansas. However, there is no one by that name in the database. The police suspect that the person who identified as Grady Edwards had previously been involved in similar crimes. 3 years ago, a family perished under similar circumstances, and the stepfather fled. The man always paid in cash and left no personal information or photographs. The man entered a supermarket and began flirting with a woman who was here with her 2 children, a son and a daughter. A conversation started between them. The man claimed that his wife and daughter had supposedly perished in a car accident last year. The woman sincerely sympathized with him. This charming stranger quickly won her over. At the checkout, they exchanged glances. In the parking lot, they struck up a conversation again. The woman suggested that the man go with her and her children to a pizzeria. The man introduced himself as David Harris, and the woman as Susan Harding. 6 months passed. Michael Harding returned from military school. His girlfriend Kelly picked him up at the airport and drove him home. He couldn't wait to meet his mother's new boyfriend. Michael thinks his mother is rushing things. Kelly advised him to be patient and not to interfere in the mother's personal life. On the occasion of Michael's return, the family and friends threw a party for him. Everyone was delighted that Michael was finally back with them. Finally, Michael personally met David. He wasn't in a hurry to trust him. Everyone was having a lot of fun. Susan's friends, Jackie and Leah, were thrilled with her new boyfriend. David seemed perfect. Susan pondered if she was making a mistake by planning to marry David after only 6 months of knowing him. David raised a toast to his new family. Later, Susan told her beloved that her friend Jackie had found a job for him as a real estate agent. Susan did this because she didn't want David to go on long business trips anymore. David asked Michael for a private conversation in the basement. Michael reluctantly went there. During this time, David had managed to renovate the house, and being a carpenter, even built cabinets, which were locked. David offered Michael a drink like men. It seemed he genuinely wanted to befriend his stepson and become a part of their family. Michael still looked wary. David was too blameless, which raised suspicions. After the party, Michael walked Kelly, who was going to visit her grandparents for a couple of days. Michael told her about his plans to get his driver's license soon. Later, Susan went to Michael's room. She worried that her eldest son had taken her future husband badly. But Michael was too tired to discuss it. Before bed, Susan shared her concerns about her older son with David. Prior to military school, Michael had been an unruly teenager and had been in bad company. But David was confident that things would change for the better now. Knowing that Michael used to be involved in swimming, David approached the stepson's former school and arranged for training. When Michael found out about this, he was excited and sincerely thanked his stepfather. Previously, due to his misbehavior, Michael had been kicked off the team, but after talking with David, the coach agreed to give him another chance. In the evening, Michael was on the phone with Kelly, sharing what had happened today. Kelly was confident that David could be trusted. One day when Sean, Susan's younger son, was playing video games too loudly and not listening to his mother, David rather rudely made him turn off the TV. During dinner, Sean seemed down, and Susan noticed it. But the boy said that everything was fine. David on the other hand said that he missed such warm family evenings. When Michael learned that David's wife and daughter had supposedly died in a car accident, he expressed his condolences. Suddenly the doorbell rang. It was Michael's father, coming to take the younger children for the weekend. But Michael didn't even come out to greet his father. The former spouses had strained relations. Susan asked Jay how his new younger girlfriend was doing. Jay said they had broken up, and she was just a bit younger than her, just more conscious of her appearance. Susan was hurt by this, of course. Susan, Michael and David continued with their dinner. David suggested to his stepson that they have lunch together tomorrow. Michael didn't mind. The next morning the doorbell rang. It was Mrs. Cutter, the elderly neighbor of the Hardings. Michael overheard as the neighbor told his mother that the police had created a composite sketch of a dangerous criminal who looked very similar to David. But Susan said it couldn't be him. During breakfast, Susan told David about it. She thought it was funny. Michael overheard their conversation and became suspicious. Susan wished her beloved a good day, and he left. Michael pretended he had just woken up. Seeing Mrs. Cutter outside, David greeted her in a friendly manner. The woman immediately became suspicious. As agreed, David and Michael had lunch at a cafe. Suddenly David asked Michael to be his best man at the wedding. It was unexpected for Michael, but he agreed. David said that family was the most important thing to him. After losing his wife and daughter, he had given up hope of finding happiness. Michael found it strange that the stepfather had first mentioned his deceased daughter with one name and then with another. Showing clients a house for sale, David seemed nervous. When he returned home, he crossed paths with Mrs. Cutter again. David searched the internet for a list of wanted criminals and found Grady Edwards. This was the name he had used in his previous family. Mrs. Cutter had many cats. Hearing the doorbell ring, she opened the door, but there was no one outside. She didn't know that someone had managed to enter her home at that moment. All the cats started behaving restlessly. At one point, Mrs. Cutter saw David's reflection in a mirrored wardrobe. He attacked her and took her life. At home when Michael and Kelly were alone, someone opened the door. Michael was sure he had locked it. Suddenly David appeared, who had supposedly just gotten home from work. Embarrassed, Kelly hurried away. In the evening, Susan and David had an educational conversation with Michael, saying that he and Kelly shouldn't show their affection so openly. The conversation was interrupted by angry Jay, who burst into the house. It turned out that Sean had told him about the video game incident. Jay threatened David, but Michael held his father back in time. Of course, Susan didn't immediately believe that David was capable of harming her son. Michael took his father outside. They saw each other for the first time in a year. Michael confessed to his father that he was still upset with him for leaving. Jay said he left Susan, but not them. His children were always his top priority. Meanwhile, Susan comforted Sean, who already regretted sharing everything with his father. David intervened in the conversation, asking for forgiveness from his stepson and promising that such incidents would never happen again. David watched from the window as Michael and his father hugged. Their reconciliation was not in his favor. In the bedroom, Susan told her fiancé that his parenting methods were unacceptable to her. David assured her that it was an isolated incident. Early in the morning, Michael received a message from his father, who wrote that he was glad to see him. Leaving the room, Michael overheard David downstairs pace nervously from side to side and talking to himself. Soon in the real estate agency office, Jackie praised David for his good work. The clients decided to buy the house. But Jackie reminded David to fill out the official employment paperwork. Of course, David had no intention of doing so, as he lived under a fabricated identity. During dinner, David informed the family that he intended to quit his job because he didn't like working in real estate. Susan was not thrilled about the prospect of her beloved going on business trips again. Sean was now afraid to play video games loudly, but his older brother assured him that David wouldn't harm him anymore. That evening, while David was looking for job openings, Susan planned to meet with her friends to discuss preparations for her wedding. David sharpened many pencils to calm his nerves. Suddenly the doorbell rang. Jay was standing at the doorstep, wanting to talk to David. He invited Susan's ex-husband into the house. However, their conversation was interrupted by a phone call. David answered the call. It was Susan, who said that the ex-husband had left her a message saying he was planning to visit the children. David lied that Jay never arrived. Jay made it clear to David that he knew about his lies. Jay had called the university where David supposedly attended. There were only 4 graduates with the name David Harris in the university's history, but they were clearly not the one who was going to marry Susan. At that moment, David disappeared. Jay wandered through the rooms calling for David as he suddenly attacked him from behind. The boys upstairs heard suspicious noises but did not pay attention. Meanwhile, Susan shared with her friends her concerns about David constantly changing jobs. David knew for sure that Jay was going to leave, so he took Jay's belongings from the taxi and took it to the basement, where immobilized Jay himself was. David decided to finish what he had started and take Jay's life, but a phone call from Michael interrupted him. Concerned, Michael tried to reach his father, who had promised to visit. Hearing David's voice from the basement, Michael was about to go down there, but changed his mind. Meanwhile, Jackie says that David's dismissal seems suspicious. Perhaps he did it because he didn't want to disclose his personal information for some reason. But Susan thought these concerns were far-fetched. She loves David very much. Her life has found meaning again with him. When Susan returned home, she saw David and Sean playing video games together. Suddenly David confessed that he needed to admit something. Susan was prepared for something bad, but it turned out that David had simply broken a vase in the living room. Susan had no idea that the vase was an instrument of a crime. Jackie still doubts whether David can be trusted, but Leah, like Susan, doesn't share her fears. Leah considers David a gentleman and a great guy. The only thing that raises suspicions is that he always pays in cash, not with a credit card. For her peace of mind, Jackie decided to call Jay. Perhaps he can help her learn more about David. Susan told her elder son that she was sorry the father didn't come. Jay had often forgotten his fatherly duties in the past, which is why Susan values David so much. However, Michael was not in the mood to discuss it at the moment. David spends a lot of time in the basement, but Susan doesn't think much of it. He sent a message to Michael from Jay's phone, apologizing for not being able to come. He also wrote that he supposedly made some inquiries about David and realized that he could be trusted. At that moment, Michael was listening to music to distract himself from sad thoughts but couldn't hold back tears. After hiding Jay's things in one of his cabinets, David left the basement. The next morning, he saw police cars pull up to Mrs. Cutter's house. Michael saw it through the window too. Mrs. Cutter's demise was ruled an accident. David said how sorry he was to hear that. Susan was shocked to learn of what had happened. She felt ashamed for her previous negative comments about the old lady. Michael began to suspect that something was amiss. During the day, David received a call from Jackie, reminding him about the documents. David in turn reminded her that he no longer worked for them. But Jackie said the documents were still needed for the IRS. David realized he was at risk of being exposed. Moreover, Michael seemed to be getting suspicious. Michael shared his concerns with Kelly, but she thought it was a series of coincidences. Michael knew that if Kelly didn't believe him, his mother certainly wouldn't. If he interfered with her personal happiness, she would send him back to military school. Michael stood by his opinion. Kelly called it paranoia and told him to think about something more important. David said that he needed to leave briefly to pick up the younger children. Michael decided to use this opportunity to go through his stepfather's things. Kelly thought it was a bad idea and tried to dissuade him, but Michael felt that his stepfather was hiding something. Meanwhile, David received a call from Susan, who said she would pick up the children herself. David returned home and immediately noticed that the teenagers were not by the pool. Hearing footsteps downstairs, Michael and Kelly realized they were trapped. David saw wet footprints on the floor and began searching for them throughout the house. When David entered his room, no one was there. Hearing laughter outside, he saw through the window Michael and Kelly fooling around in the pool. At dinner, David was moody and silent. Michael said that he still couldn't reach his father. That same evening, Michael called Kelly and admitted that she was right. He might be paranoid because he hadn't yet adjusted to the idea of his mother getting married. David knocked on Michael's room and asked if he had a moment to talk. He hinted that if Michael tried to turn his mother against him, he would end up back at military school. At night when everyone was asleep, Michael checked David's computer and found that he had recently searched for a list of wanted criminals. The sketch of Grady Edwards looked exactly like him. The next day, Michael showed Kelly the sketch, but she said it didn't prove anything. Perhaps Susan was the one searching for the list of criminals, which piqued her interest after her conversation with Mrs. Cutter. Learning that the boyfriend had changed his mind about attending college with her, Kelly became upset and went inside the house. Suddenly David appeared in the kitchen, ready to listen to upset Kelly. David told her that if she ever needed help, she could always count on him. Kelly was confused and hurried away. Later, Michael left her a voicemail message asking her to meet. David texted him again on behalf of his father. David didn't expect to receive a message from Jackie on Jay's phone. She texted that she wanted to talk to him about David. When Michael called his father again, he heard that the sound coming from the basement. This meant that the father's phone was in their house. However, David pretended that it was his phone that had rung. He said he had just been offered a well-paying job. Susan arrived. While the mother and stepfather were engrossed in each other, Michael discreetly took a photo of David. During the day, the family had lunch outdoors. Susan told her elder son that he should find a summer job to save up for a car. In the evening, Susan was preparing to take Beth and Sean to a friend's house, from where all the children would all go to summer camp the next morning. David stayed home on the pretext of deciding about work. So, David and Michael were left home alone. When David asked about his plans for the evening, Michael confusedly replied that he was going to see Kelly. Before leaving, Michael noticed that David's photo had disappeared from his phone. He immediately told Kelly about it, but she still viewed his crazy theory with skepticism. However, Michael was convinced that David was hiding something in the basement. Jackie is getting ready for a business trip, but before that, she wants to talk to Susan. David still hasn't provided his documents, and she never received a response from Jay. Jackie believes that Susan is in danger and sent her an email. But Jackie didn't know that it was David who was at the computer at that moment. He read about Jackie's intentions to contact a private detective regarding the friend's future husband. Of course he deleted the message. Realizing that his secret would soon be exposed, David is planning to leave this family, just as he did in the past. Meanwhile, Jackie is getting ready for the airport, checking if everything is turned off in the house. When she approached the pool, David sneaked up on her and pushed in, taking her life. Soon Susan returned home. David was already here. Susan is concerned that Jackie is not answering her calls. Susan didn't see David lock the front door. Later, David offered Susan a sedative to get a good rest. Unsuspecting Susan takes the pill. She does not know that David has already packed his things. Michael is determined to find out what David is hiding in the basement. Kelly still doesn't believe her boyfriend, but she asked him to be careful nonetheless. Since the basement door is locked, Michael broke the upper window and crawled inside. All the closets were also locked. Meanwhile, Kelly waited in the car. When her mobile phone ran out of battery, it made her nervous. By opening one of the closets, Michael discovered his father's belongings. Michael realized that the freezer concealed an even more sinister secret. David made sure that Susan was fast asleep. Kelly found a charger, and seeing the lights in one of the rooms in the house turn on, called Michael. But he accidentally dropped his phone on the floor, and the battery fell out. Failing to reach her boyfriend, Kelly rushed to the house. When she saw the father's body, Michael recoiled in horror. David sneaked up behind Kelly and knocked her out. Realizing that his girlfriend was in danger, Michael rushed to her aid, but David barricaded the window. Michael was trapped. The noise awakened Susan. She asked David what was happening. David looked very angry and said that this family was not right for him. The problem was the guy. Realizing that a dangerous criminal was before her, Susan rushed to escape. When the guy finally got out, he found Kelly and brought her back to consciousness. Susan locked herself in a room, but David broke down the door. In a fit of desperation, Susan wounded him and fled, reuniting with her son and Kelly. However, David quickly regained his composure and was determined to finish what he had started. The family ran to the attic, and David followed them. They were trapped again. A fight ensued between the stepfather and the stepson. However, the floor was rotten, and Michael fell through, clutching onto the surviving boards. The women fell down after him. Taking advantage of David's distraction, Michael attacked him, and they ended up on the roof. Michael tried to push David off, but he held onto him tightly. In the end they both fell together and lost consciousness. David vaguely remembered waking up in the hospital. His mother was also here. Doctors fought for his life. When David woke up in the hospital room, his mother and Kelly were nearby. It turned out that Michael had been in a coma for a month. But the worst part was that David managed to escape. When the police arrived, he had already disappeared. In the final scene, we see a single mother in a supermarket. She was here with her sons. David, with an altered appearance, began to flirt with a woman, telling her that his wife and daughter perished in an accident a year ago. The woman mentioned that she had also lost her husband. The man introduced himself as Chris Ames, and the woman as Julie King. She will be the next.